Hello everybody and welcome to the second video in our series of videos on Northern Ireland from 1920 up to 1998. Today we are looking at Northern Ireland during World War II and throughout the 1950s. As always, we begin with our learning outcomes. So by the end of this presentation, you guys should be able to name 4 contributions of Northern Ireland to World War II. You guys should be able to describe conditions in Northern Ireland during the Blitz. And finally, you guys should be able to name 3 features of Northern Irish life after World War II. So as we've seen before, World War II broke out on the 1st of September 1939 when Germany invaded Poland, triggering war in Europe. Northern Ireland, as part of the United Kingdom, entered the war when United Kingdom declared war on Germany on the 3rd of September. Northern Ireland had many contributions towards World War II. The Northern Irish ports served as a base from which Britain fought the Battle of the Atlantic, which the Allies successfully gained control of the Atlantic. Part of that was due to them cracking the Enigma code of the Germans, so they were able to detect U-boats. But the Northern Irish ports were very important in this as well. Another thing was it served as a base for a lot of US troops, and at one point up to 120,000 US soldiers were in Northern Ireland during the preparations for D-Day, and also they would have been stationed in the ports and stuff like that. Another contribution was that 40,000 people volunteered from Northern Ireland to join the war, and 7,000 of those were women. There was no conscription in Northern Ireland. There was conscription in the rest of the United Kingdom, but there was no conscription in Northern Ireland. People were asked to volunteer. 40,000 did so. There were actually more volunteers from the south of Ireland to join World War II than there was actually from the north of Ireland. Another contribution to World War II was the industrial power of Northern Ireland and its contribution to the war effort. It had an upside for Northern Ireland in that unemployment dropped from over 25% in the 1930s to under 5% during World War II. Harland and Wolff made battleships, while a company known as Shorts manufactured tanks, aircraft and parachutes, which were invaluable to the Allies. And the final contribution of Northern Ireland to World War II was the feeding of Britain. They provided food for the British market. It worked out quite well for the farmers of Northern Ireland, as they received a guaranteed price for their produce as well, which brought stability at a time of massive uncertainty. We saw that James Craig had been the Prime Minister of Northern Ireland after the Government of Ireland Act of 1920, and he served as Prime Minister from 1920 into 1940. But he was succeeded by a man called J.M. Andrews. However, Andrews was soon replaced by this man, Basil Brooke. People weren't happy due to the hardships of rationing, and really the big thing was his handling of the following thing, which was the Blitz. Belfast was not prepared for the Blitz. The government of Northern Ireland put in no procedures to protect the population of the country, believing that Belfast was too far away from Northern Ireland from Germany to be bombed. They had no searchlights, they had very few anti-aircraft guns, and they had no shelters for the people. Remember, in England alone, 300,000 Anderson shelters had been sold, whereas there was no provision for this in Northern Ireland. The Blitz was pretty devastating to Northern Ireland. They were bombed 4 times during a 2-month period during April and May of 1941. Over 1,100 people died during these attacks. There was one particular attack at Easter killed over 900 people alone. So it was a pretty devastating thing. People had to leave to the countryside as there was no shelters and there was no provision to try to stop these attacks. When World War II ended, the people of Britain were looking for a change, and they elected a Labour government, much to the shock of Winston Churchill, who had brought Great Britain through the war. But they lost power because Labour were promising something called the welfare state. And this is where they promised to take care of people from the cradle to the grave. And this had a knock-on effect in Northern Ireland. all the provisions that were extended to Britain also went to Northern Ireland. So there was an increase in the funding for housing. They wanted to make sure that everyone had a house. So new houses were being built at a high rate. In Northern Ireland, there is that special kind of sectarianism element comes into it, and that Catholics were discriminated against by the unionist dominated local councils for the houses. So if you were Protestant, you were more likely to get one of these local council houses than if you were Catholic. Another provision from the welfare state was the introduction of free education for all secondary level students from 1947. We saw in our studies of Sean Lamass how Ireland brought in free education in the 1960s, while Northern Ireland had brought this in 15 years earlier with the Education Act of 1947. They also gave free medical care to mothers and children, and there was a TB campaign was brought in to try to reduce the number of deaths. Again, when we were studying the inter-party government of Ireland from 1948 to 1951, we saw how these two issues were affecting the Republic of Ireland as it became in 1949. And the TB campaign led by Noel Brown really reduced the number of deaths with TB. The same was happening in Northern Ireland. And then we saw how it was actually the idea of free medical care to mothers and children brought down the first inter-party government in the Republic of Ireland, whereas in Northern Ireland this act was brought in quite easily. The last aspect of life in Northern Ireland after World War II has to deal with the growing divide between nationalists and unionists. Northern nationalists, they launched an anti-partition campaign. They were trying to get rid of partition. They were supported by the government in the south, but once Ireland had declared itself a republic in 1949, the British government had stepped in and said that they would stand behind Northern Ireland in whatever decisions they made. And of course, it was a unionist-led government, so their decision was that they would continue partition, despite the anti-partition campaign that was being launched by the Northern nationalists. They also had to deal with the IRA, who launched another campaign from 1956 up until 1962 to deal with this. Internment was introduced. Over 250 suspected IRA members were interned, and throughout the border campaigns, the bombing campaigns, 18 people were killed during the campaign. It didn't achieve anything close to what the IRA wanted. It was seen as a real failure from the IRA, and they would not come back to prominence until the Troubles kick off in 1968. So that brings us to the end of our presentation. So you guys should now be able to name 4 contributions of Northern Ireland to World War II, whether it's the ports, the base for the US soldiers, the agriculture, the production of food, the industry, or the volunteers going over to fight in World War II. Second, you guys should be able to describe the conditions in Northern Ireland during the Blitz, but especially attention paid to the casualties of the Blitz and how unprepared the North was for the Blitz. And finally, you guys should be able to name 3 features of Northern Irish life after World War II that could relate to some of the acts brought in by the welfare state of the Labour government, or for the anti-partition campaign, or for the IRA campaign from 1956 to 1962. So that brings us to the end of our presentation. Hope you guys got something good from this video. Thanks for watching.